Hey church, welcome to this week's small group. Now, I hope you enjoyed this week's sermon as we came to the point that we need to be faithful to God because God is faithful to us. And the way that I want you to start out this small group is start out by describing a tough time in your life that when you look back, you realize that God had a plan for your life from the very beginning. Maybe it felt like life was completely out of control, but when you look back, you realize, wow, God had a plan. And what kind of events usually cause people to question the goodness of God? Today we're going to be reviewing the story of Joseph. Now, you need to know that Joseph had a messed up family with a whole lot of half-brothers. Joseph's father had 4 women that he called his wife, but he really only loved one of them, and that was Rachel. And he kept having children with the rest of them, and Rachel was barren until finally Rachel had a son by the name of Joseph. And because this was the son of the woman that he loved Joseph, and he showed favoritism to Joseph, which made Joseph's brothers very angry and jealous with him. Now, with that in mind, I want you to read Genesis chapter 37, verses 5 through 11. Do you think Joseph was wrong for sharing his dreams with his family? And when God speaks to us, should we share it with others? And why might others react negatively to God's leading in our lives? Next, I want you to read Genesis chapter 37, verses 23 through 28, as we see how the brothers respond to Joseph's dreams. Did Joseph do anything to deserve being treated this way? And does it seem as though Joseph's dream of ruling over his family will come true at this point? I want you to remember that Joseph is waiting for God's word to come true in his life. He had this dream. God spoke to him very clearly that he was to become a ruler, that even his family would eventually bow down to him. Next, I want you to read Genesis chapter 39, verses 1 through 10. Describe how Joseph waited on God in these passages. And what does this tell us about how we should be waiting on God? I love how Joseph waits on God at this point in his life. He works hard and he lives with integrity. You know, anybody at this point could have just thrown up their hands and said, forget this whole thing. Forget this dream that I had with God. I deserve a vice in my life. But instead, he lives with integrity. And that's how you and I should be waiting on God. Next, I want you to read Genesis chapter 39, verses 11 through 23. Did Joseph in any way deserve what happened to him at Potiphar's house? First, we looked at how he was treated by his brothers. Did he deserve that? Did he deserve what happened at Potiphar's house? And does it seem as if Joseph is getting closer to fulfilling the dream that God gave him, or further away? And last, pretend like you're Joseph, rotting in an Egyptian prison. What is your conversation with God like at that point? What I want you to notice about those last passages is that in spite of all of this, Joseph still lives with integrity. We see him even in prison, he's living with integrity and he's working hard. Now, I'm going to kind of tell you the rest of the story. There's a lot to read. If you wanted to read all of this, you can read it on your own if you like. But eventually, Joseph is introduced in prison to 2 men who work directly for Pharaoh. And these 2 men have these dreams, and they don't know what these dreams mean. Joseph interprets these dreams, and eventually these dreams both come true. But it's not until 2 years later, when Pharaoh has a disturbing dream that nobody can interpret, that one of those men remembers Joseph and says, hey, Pharaoh, you've got to meet this guy. I think this guy can help you. And so Joseph was brought before Pharaoh. He interpreted the dream that there would be a terrible famine in Egypt. And he even gave Pharaoh a plan on how Pharaoh could protect Egypt from the famine. Pharaoh made Joseph second in command over all of Egypt. And eventually, Joseph's own brothers had to come to him for food because of the famine. And without even knowing that that was their brother, they bowed down to him simply because he was the ruler, the second in command of all of Egypt. Next, I want you to read Genesis chapter 50, verses 18 through 21. Where did all of those years of hardship bring Joseph in relation to his dream at the beginning of the story? Did it bring him closer to fulfilling the dream or further away? And what do we learn from Joseph about waiting on God through the tough times? Well, this concludes our lesson for this week. I want you to close in prayer and pray that God would help us to wait on Him. And while you wait, I want to remind you, be faithful to God because He is faithful to us.